And some of you were in the audience when I collaborated with two colleagues in distance, and I touched upon the research. But now I'm going to switch to the future. What does it mean that no matter where you work, who you are, there must be a reason for you to be here sitting in this room, really to understand what the future is going to hold in this profession, who you are and what you can do to contribute to the common cause. So I chose this topic, unlike the topic you saw from ESL student to professional. Yes, I was a student, now I'm a professional, but I'm going to leave that for other occasion. So 6 abilities of future ELT professional. What are the 6 abilities I want to propose? First, I think anyone working in this field need to make constant and effective changes. Changes are inevitable. 20, 30 years ago, learners are learning English in pattern drills and in communicative language learning and in memorization. But now, kids can learn English in many other ways because of the advancement of technology and because of the different kinds of purposes of learning English. Learn and speak at least one other language is very important, not because you can communicate with people from another culture, but because of the process of learning a language can help you anticipate, emphasize your learner's struggles and difficulties. Teach less to minimize learning. And as you know that we have contact hours with students in classrooms. And usually teachers try to explain, try to spend a lot of time teaching. But those good teachers actually teach less. Let students take care of themselves with proper guidance and scaffolding. Teach English in at least one subject matter. This is the future. That colleges will now no longer have many EFL teachers in the future because kids do not need to learn general English if they start learning English at the grade level 1. They should have passed TOEFL or IELTS when they graduate from high school. So what they want to learn is English in the subject matter. Teaching English in mathematics or English in computer science, relevant to their major. And that is the future. Familiarize yourself with new learning and teaching modes. Online language teaching is certainly one of the modes, collaborative language learning and teaching, and cooperative learning or other kinds of modes. So we are multitasking. That we are not request students to take notes. They can use a tab to take a picture of all the slides without writing a single word. It's very easy. However, you need to know that who these learners are. And they can listen to music while learning English easily, and they can do several things all at the same time. And finally, last but not least, ensure learning outside the classroom. Actually, lots of learning takes place outside the classroom. Classroom is a venue, but it is not the only venue for people to learn English, especially in Korea, in China, where English is not spoken outside the classroom. Students should be provided opportunities to use the language they learn in the classroom in order to become language users, be able to communicate, rather than students who can only take examinations. Okay, so these are the 6 points. I'm going to show you some of the evidence, and I want to cite some of the research I myself did. So what is the future of ELT? That is a fundamental question I want to address. Suraj Kanagaraja in TESOL Quarterly a few years ago wrote a synthesis about the field, and he mentioned 3 points which I think still relevant today. One is global inclusiveness, local situatedness, disciplinary collaboration. First of all, the ultimate goal for us to teach English to learners in different countries is to enable them to have the competence to communicate globally. So global citizen is our ultimate goal. However, each country has its unique situation, particularities, which are entwined with its local culture and the specific needs. So we need to bear in mind where we teach, what the learners bring with them to the classroom, and how different you are from the learners. And the last but not least is disciplinary collaboration. When we teach content-based English, we really need to collaborate with content experts. Sometimes we are not experts in all the fields, but we need to collaborate with disciplines. education, psychology, sociology, anthropology at the university settings, in high schools, different subject matters. And I think eventually we need to help those who teach content courses to be able to teach mathematics or biology in English. So that is our goal. And likewise, English teachers now should be able to teach one of the subject matters. Only in this way, students will learn better and more purposefully. So the research I'm going to share with you is the synthesis of all the publications in TESOL Quarterly, starting from 1967. So I looked at more than 1,000 articles published over the last 4 decades and tried to look at what topics are chosen, what methodologies are used, what are the results, any implications for the classroom. And then I look at the trends each decade, whether teacher development is the trend in 70s or teaching younger learners is the trend in 2000. So I'm going to show you some of the preliminary data to just give you a sense of what this field is moving towards, what have we done in the past. There is limitation, however, by using only TESOL Quarterly, because there are so many other journals out there. However, TESOL Quarterly is selected because first, TQ is one of the flagship journals in the field. It's a flagship journal of the leading association called TESOL. KOTESOL is part of this association. Secondly, I use full-length articles because they're all research-based. Okay? They are not thinking pieces. They're all based upon whatever research they do. Methodology is sound. Reviewers, blind reviewers have done their due diligence, and so published articles should be the basis to reflect the trends of the field. And thirdly, I try to look at those distributions, like ESL versus EFL, elementary school versus high school, and the research methodology to look at the different combinations. So here are some of the results. So I labeled all the articles in the following categories. Either the subject matter, the methodology, or the context, and try to go through all the articles and try to label them in language skills. Whatever is related to listening, speaking, reading, and writing, or translation are labeled as language skills. So 261 articles were published. Language knowledge, pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar teaching, and they are all related. So now 190. Methodology of language teaching, how to teach methods, multiple intelligence, content-based instruction, English for academic purpose, communicative language teaching, so 179. Language learning and learners, anything related to learners or language learning process, 152. Language policy standards, 124. Language use related to sociolinguistics, the function of the language in the society, 111. Assessment or testing, measurement, 103. Teacher development, 96. Curriculum and materials, 95. Anything related to second language acquisition theory or practice, 70. Research, 32. Corpus linguistics, 11. So if those of you who sat in my previous session know that when I say research is not the favorite topic among teachers, true, only 32 articles are really published about research methodology. So when I look at them from the distribution, and we realize what comes to the top in publication or in the teacher's research are still skill areas. How to teach pronunciation, how to teach vocabulary, how to use pedagogical grammar to help students rationalize what they learn. So skills and knowledge and methodology, practicum are still the top because these are the actual techniques and strategies that can help us teach students directly. And then when you move on to this one, last three, one is teacher development, which is long neglected. Or even if we pay attention to, we still lack the funding, lack the opportunities, lack the venues for teachers to publish. And these are the issues. And curriculum materials, in some countries, I don't know Korea, it's determined by the central government or Ministry of Education what textbooks you can use, rather than determined by the instructors. There is a standard guideline at each level the students need to reach. So you cannot do much about it. And then ACLA sounds too theoretical. Who cares, when you teach, as long as your students perform well. So ACLA is still in the remote area, receive less attention. So these are the top 10 issues among all, and I try to show you that what receive more attention and what receive less attention. In terms of the distribution of instruction at different levels, as you know, that more attention has been given to tertiary university level teaching, especially English as for academic purposes. Next is younger learners learning. That received lots of attention, in particular the last couple of decades. Followed by ESP at workplace for adult language learners. And finally, it's a secondary schools. So this is distribution. That means that more and more attention are paid to adult learners, in particular those who are at college level. You might not see clearly, but if we break the last 50 years or 40 years into decades, okay, you know that primarily younger learners were not received attention when in the 60s and 70s. At that time, in China, for instance, the mandatory age to start learning English is 14 when they enter the junior high school. I'm one of them. Okay, I learned when I was 14. As you know, that when you learn English at 14, you can never overcome your accent because after puberty, 12 years old, they reach the critical mass of critical hypothesis, critical age, and so always adults, they will have accent. That's why we want to lower the age in order for younger learners who still have tongue flexibility to acquire the authentic language, pronunciation, intonation. But what is the result? Lack of teachers. We don't have enough teachers. So the kids are forced to learn with someone who cannot provide a native model. And as a result, they got stuck when they moved to middle school. And they have to unlearn something and relearn something. As a result, many of them lost motivation. They feel English learning is just so boring. And they were forced to learn at the expense of their native language. Because when you implement elementary language teaching, you take away the hours which are supposed to be spent on learning their native language. And the literacy in the first language, solid background in literacy, will eventually help learners when they learn the second language. But as a result, their native language is not as good as their counterparts 10 to 20 years ago. Is that something you have noticed? So there is some risk here for the national policy of early language education. So we'll say that early language education is great if the conditions are there. If you have good resources, if you have good teachers, and if you have supportive environment. Let's look at the next second language. We have up and down, but this one, the last one, or the secondary, as you know, is declining, and the tertiary is going up. Now, more and more attention, and ESP does also have the upward trend. In terms of the language, the function of the language, if you teach English in US, for international students, it's considered ESL. If you teach English in Korea, it's considered as EFL. If you teach English in the third place, what is third? We don't know. So if you teach English as a lingua franca, as a global language, it's a different issue. So lots of articles are devoted to foreign language education because the majority of language learners are in Asia. And within Asia, 300 million learners are from China. That's a whole university, a US population. In Korea, I'm sure that there are many, many learners of English. But how many of them can be successful? Is it economic, worthwhile to do a massive language teaching for everyone? so that no one is left behind. Or we can use aptitude test to see whether the students have the potential of learning language well, to divide different models and ask them to self-choose, or you provide guidance for those who might not want to learn English or who might not even think of anything to do with English in their future. Again, this is a political, this is language policy. In terms of the context, okay, so who are teaching and learning English in the context? Asia, 63%. Africa, 20%. Latin America, 10%. Europe, 7%. So still Asia. And that's why the future of English really rests with Asia. And if Asia can do a good job in teaching English, the world will be taken care of. So within ESL context, the majority of language teaching articles or research are done in North America, United States and Canada, and then other speaking countries, Australia or New Zealand, UK. Language context by decade. So there is still an upward trend for more research, more studies done for EFL. So EFL, even though some researchers criticize the label of English as a foreign language, they want to consider English as a global language. But in context, still we have to admit the fact that in Korea, when you take taxi, you cannot really communicate very well in English, unfortunately. But if I have a sign with Sookmyung University written in Korean, and well, yes, I know where to go. And so this is a function. And when, a few years ago, when it was 2008, when Olympic Games was held in Beijing, the Chinese government designed a program to train taxi drivers. So all the taxi drivers have to pass 30 sentences in order to be eligible to do that. If not, there is simultaneous translation. You can press the button. So when you speak English, some translator will immediately come to help. So that is the trend. Okay. Writing, reading, listening, speaking. So when we look at the 4 skills, which skill area receives more attention? It is writing. And writing is the most difficult, challenging for foreign students. Teaching writing to Korean students is not that easy. But good Korean writers have the potential to be good English writers. Poor writers in Korean might not be able to write English well. Do you believe that? Some researchers have done study and try to look at those English composition by asking the students to write in their native language on the same topic. And then try to see whether the native language writing, those who perform higher in Korean or in Chinese, have the tendency to perform well in English at the same level as their cohorts. And the results indicate that high literacy in L1 have the likelihood to lead to L2. And that's why we need to ask a fundamental question. Is it really important for any learners around the world to be solid in their literacy in their L1? It is. And there is a hidden danger in China because kids start learning English at the age of 3 or 5. And they can speak very good English, but when it comes to Chinese, they only recognize on the computer. They cannot even practice their strokes. So we are going to not have many good choreographers in the future. And there will be people who can hardly understand classic literature because of the emphasis is too much unspoken. Recalling back 20, 30 years ago, when those adults who start learning English still with heavy accent have difficulty communicating in English, once given the environment, once given time, they can perform very, very well in writing because of the solid skills in L1. So that needs to be a topic for research in the future. Skill areas, as you notice, that are receiving less attention. Part of the reason is that we focus more on integrative skills training rather than separate skill training. Because in order to speak well, some people will rely on email to say what they have to say in writing. And eventually that helps them to speak more fluently than to speak impromptu. So email is a hybrid of writing and speaking. It's not writing because you type what you want to say, rather than you are composing a message, a letter in writing. So modern technology will help learners learn not only by speaking, but also by typing. And typing is a way, and that can also help them with grammar and with spelling, etc. So that's why in the future, the integrative language teaching will be the trend rather than listening courses or speaking courses. And I would say that for those who are able to speak, have to read well in order to have substance to communicate with. You cannot ask them to say whatever they don't have in mind. So that will, if you chose a political topic in the United States, government shutdown, for instance, and ask Korean students to talk about, they have no clue how it works, even though they have high proficiency. So you need to understand the history, the political science, the government function in order to talk about it. That's why reading is very important. And so we can talk more about that. In terms of a skill, the language elements, the grammar still receives lots of attention. And even though we condemn grammar, down with grammarians, but I have to say that grammar is probably something that will really help EFL learners, especially high school and adult learners, because they can rationalize. They can do it on their own by applying the rules to what they produce. And so that has more implication for self-learning. Okay, so in addition to the data from TESOL Quarterly, I also did an eval survey among all the professionals, 3 groups, okay? And each group, leaders, TESOL leaders, practitioners, teachers, and researchers. They self-label them as researchers or teaching research, and then got lots of responses. And in the end, I synthesized 4 patterns which will have implications for the future in our field. What are they? Before I show you, can you guess what are the 4 trends, areas that we probably need more attention in the future? What?
Online learning.
Online learning. So modes of learning. Yes. Okay. Online learning. So ways of learning language will change in the future, and it has implication for teachers. What else? Teacher training, teacher development. We need to really look at not only teacher training, coming to conferences, go to workshops, reading a book. We need to have alternative ways, but most importantly, we need to provide resources for teachers to do what they have to do. Okay, very good. Politics, language policy, right? And planning, and when to start learning English. What is the ideal classroom size, and how can we incorporate our local particularities with the curriculum? And last but not least, we'll leave it. Okay, so let's see. Politics, language policy standards, language learners and learning, curriculum and teaching materials, and teacher learning and development. And I used in the middle is called complexities. So these are the 4 recurring patterns that need change, need support, and need to be rethought in order to move us forward. Let me highlight a few things within each. In terms of language policy, we still have lots of time. So I singled out 3 major issues in terms of language policy. The first is role defining neither EFL nor ESL. Do you believe that eventually we are going to break the divide and consider language teaching as a global language? We have many international schools in Korea, right? And they are simulated towards a native-like environment because English is spoken, they teach courses in English, not only English as a subject matter. And there are many people studying English in the United States for years without making progress. Why? Because they want to stay in the dorm with the same co-nationals. They go to Korean restaurants all the time, and they chat, they sit together, and they just refuse to venture out of their own community comfort zone. So those teachers or those students, having spent a few years in the United States, upon return, still cannot speak good English. They did not take advantage of the environment. On the other hand, here in Korea, if you really want to take advantage, you can find native speakers, you can go to language lab or communities, you can go online, watch TV. Lots of students learn quite a lot by watching The Big Bang Theory or Friends because they can pick up so much out of it. And that is a motivation. So you can make something out of nothing or out of something. And you can lose lots of opportunities. But what is more important is the function of the language. ESL, EFL. So that is an issue we really need to think. What do we mean by ESL, EFL? How can we make EFL environment more similar to ESL? And how can we take advantage of ESL to immerse those students outside the classroom? Second issue is breaking the native, non-native divide. I was a proponent, advocator almost 2 decades ago when we started a caucus in TESOL. Some of you might remember called the Non-Native English-Speaking Caucus, because at that time in 1996, there was a need to help establish the credibility of those who teach English, whose first language is not English, because admittedly, this is a huge group among the language teachers. They take at least 80% of the teacher teaching English, Korean, Chinese, Thai. The third is interlanguage. You know, it is why it is so hard in our field, because you always have a model. For instance, whoever learns a language, you will say, oh, you still need to work hard. You have not reached that level. So interlanguage, proposed by Larry Selinker, many decades ago, is a concept that you have L1 and L2. So you are moving from your native language to the target language. And then in between these two, this is called interlanguage. You might be at a different point in your interlanguage, but hardly anyone starting from L1 can move to the native language unless you move to that environment at a young age. And then some researchers like Tom Scoville realized that interlanguage should be differentiated at different levels: syntactic level, morphological level, phonological level. Younger learners might reach the native-like proficiency in speaking, in pronunciation easily because they started learning at a young age. And adults might reach semantic level more easily because they have highly developed cognitive skills. And yet at pronunciation level, they can never reach the proficiency or the target. So interlanguage is a myth that we tend to use the target to help learners to move towards, and only in the end a few can accomplish. So that is in general discouraging for learners. But now we know that English has played a function of a global language, and lots of people who communicate on a daily basis in English are not native speakers. Chinese speaking English with German. Turks speak English with Kazakhstani people. And they are using the language in the third place, so only communicate in English. And mixed marriage also caused that issue, right? Parents don't speak same language, and yet they have to speak English to the kids they have. And so do you think that kid is a native English speaker? a Korean married a Thai living in Germany. And they speak English to the kid. And there is no environment of English, and yet kids grow up by speaking English. So what kind of language is it? Global language, right? It's hard to label. It's hard to label. And that will happen. And more people will go through that process. So interlanguage as a target, as a goal for language teaching and learning might be challenged in the future. And that will reflect on our assessment, on our teaching methods, on our goal, on our evaluation for students' learning. Theme number 2, language learners and learning. One of the issues I believe will receive lots of attention is really look at the role of the learners. So we are no longer treat language learners as learners. You learn, I teach. Rather, you will help them to use the language while learning. So practice is very important. That's why we say teachers should teach less to create an environment, provide topics for students to engage themselves in discussing, while teachers will provide proper guidance, rather than you talk and they repeat. So that user concept by Vivian Cook and sociolinguists really focus on language use. But it's challenging for foreign language contests because usually you have many students in the classroom. Sometimes you cannot give opportunities to all of them. If you divide them into small groups, collaborative learning, then by the time you spend a minute to each group, the class is over. And if you let them go free, and they are going to speak in their native language. So what can you do? Teaching English to young learners, I talked enough, and I think there is a problem. Not the policy, but the implementation. And the last but not least in this area is digital natives. Our learners are not you. They grow up in a different age, and they are multitasking. So if you teach them, force them to learn the way you learn the language, it's not going to work. So you have to be computer savvy, and you have to play games with them, and you have to understand multitasking to let them know that you know what they know. You do what they do in order to bridge the gap and create good learning environment. Third area is curriculum and teaching materials. Lots of books are disappearing, and when professors talk about something and students at the same time can find hundreds of resources on that topic, and they actually are learning from the internet rather than listening to you. Many universities in the United States now have options for students. Professors will teach in the classroom and can tell students, you don't have to come to the classroom if you want to study. These are the readings, and this is the test. So when the options are given to students, and 2/3 of the students chose to stay in their dorm to study rather than coming to the classroom. And as a result, those 2/3 of students perform equally well, if not much higher. What does that mean? That means learning can be more individualized. When professor delivers a topic, at certain point, students can learn. At other points, some students have already learned. And at another point, students feel they cannot understand. So they need to be guided, to be given different options. That's why online learning will work, even though with its limitedness. And classroom management is a key. Morale of the students, professor in Korea might feel humiliated if not a lot of students show up, because you see, we are the authority. We need people to come. And here in this audience, we only have about 20 people. And I use my Chinese thinking. I'm disappointed. I thought that at least 100 people will come. But hey, people have different options. And when they learn, eventually what is talked about, they will regret. But other people will be happy because they got something else. So when we do concurrent sessions, sometimes it's always anticipated. So one of my earlier presentations, almost 20-some years ago, we had 3 audiences in the presentation. One is my co-presenter, and one is my advisor. And that was my first presentation in Indiana, Bloomington, in the regional TESOL conference. So in the end, we had a great time. We just discussed, changed all the format, and we just say, why is it that people are not coming? Because of bad timing, because of the odd location, or because of the lack of interest in the subject matter, or because you are not known, or because of what. But regardless, in order to really make some impact, you need to think about the substance. So let me move on with the English media instruction, ESP, EAP, EPP, alternative assessment. And alternative assessment is the key. So in China, in the United States, we have TOEFL. In UK, we have IELTS. And students have to go through, take the examination in order to achieve same scores. Thank you. And sometimes in the United States, when we have high achievers in TOEFL GRE, we realize that these people cannot communicate. When you have them to become graduate teaching assistants, students complain they cannot understand, and yet they have high scores. So it's most difficult to testing of oral proficiency. We have the spoken English by ETAs, or speak test. And sometimes they are only mechanical issues. For instance, they just give you 10 or 15 words, ask you to read according to grammar of the sentence. So you improvise and try to put together the meaning. And those kinds of skills sometimes are very artificial. And so we need to change. We need to design assessment that can really show the skills of the learners, which will be useful in the future. And last but not least, called teacher learning and development. And teacher learning concept is very important. We always talk about teacher education, teacher development, professional development. It's good, but in essence, we teachers have to learn something new, have new tricks every once in a while. Otherwise, you feel all your tricks are gone. You are exhausted, just like the candles being burned on both ends. In the end, you say, oh, have I ever taught English for 30 years? I actually know nothing about English. And that is a phenomenon or complex we always have. So constantly being recharged and given the opportunity to play different roles are very important. Teacher development, different formats, and global competence is a key. When we say global competence, in our field, we have communicative competence, right? By Sauvignon and Delheim's, proposed communicative competence, which includes 4 competencies. First is linguistic competence. Second is pragmatic competence. The third is discourse competence. The fourth is strategic competence. But are they enough for our teachers? No. We need 5th dimension, which I propose is called intercultural competence. Depending on who they are, where they are from, whether you can communicate. So these are the trends I feel we need to rethink and do more research and try to help ourselves moving towards or wrestle with all the time. And because of this, I want to re-emphasize the 6 abilities I believe we should have, or at least try to cope with. One is make constant effective changes starting from ourselves. We need to do something, change something, to cater to the needs of new generation, to really help our learners to become global citizens. We need to learn and speak at least another language, not to the perfection, but the process of learning every few years will give you the perspective of your learners. Very important. And I regret to this day that I did not learn Spanish when I worked in Tucson for 13 years. So when people ask me, so did you learn your Spanish? I said no. Then I felt so humiliated. I could have learned Spanish, but had I not spent so much time on publication in order to get tenure, I would have learned more Spanish, because you have your priority at a certain period of time. But now it's not too late. I can still learn. When I traveled to Brazil, and I said, oh my gosh, if only I could speak Portuguese. And I watched some of my colleagues speaking fluently, But when they go to China, everyone look at me, oh, Jun, you are great, because I can speak 7 dialects in Chinese. So hey, we always have our own advantage. So speak something, do something you haven't done is very important. Teach less to maximize learning is very important. And always remember, whatever you do, that if the learners do not take initiatives, the learning is not going to be successful. And one of the indications that learners will be motivated, actively participate in discussion, and become the agent of change. Teach English in at least one subject matter, as I said, very important. And you think about what you can do. And also familiarize yourself with new learning and teaching modes. And last but not least, ensure learning outside the classroom. So these are the 6 abilities I believe we can always think about and try to do something, not 1 year for one, okay? All simultaneously at a different speed depending on your own situation. And I believe that's the last slide. Let me try. Yes, that's it. Thank you very much. And we have some time.